Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, we're on the ground in Gaza as protests turn to funerals. The human toll of Palestinians killed by Israeli troops in one of the most violent days on the border in years. Then helping first-generation students succeed. How UCLA is mentoring students through the unique challenges of being the first in the family to attend college. And the second part in our series, focusing on the growing rate of depression on college campuses. Tonight, students speak out about their own struggles in hopes of helping others.
I thought everybody gets stressed out and everybody freezes when they're stressed out. But I slept through an exam and I didn't even feel like even emailing the professor because I felt so much shame.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. There was more violence along the Israeli border with Gaza today, but less than yesterday's explosive reactions to the opening of the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. At least 2 Palestinians died as a result of Israeli gunfire. World reaction including protests in and beyond the Muslim world, ambassador expulsions, and staunch U.S. support of Israel's actions. Nick Schifrin has our first report.
In Gaza, today was for burying the dead. Nearly 60 funerals in 24 hours, the deadliest day since the 2014 war. At Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, the wounded overwhelm the small staff who's chronically short of beds and supplies. In Ramallah, on the West Bank, young men threw stones and Molotov cocktails at Israeli troops. Israelis fired tear gas. Palestinians call today the Nakba, or catastrophe, the date 70 years ago when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled or fled their ancestral homes on the day Israel was created. Mustafa Barghouti is a prominent Palestinian politician.
We're here to say that this Israeli oppression will not break our will or our popular resistance.
Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, the flags are flying above the new U.S. Embassy. In Jewish West Jerusalem, residents displayed signs thanking President Trump. But from South Africa to Turkey, protesters criticized what they called an Israeli massacre of Palestinians in Gaza. Turkey's prime minister called for Muslim countries to unite against Israel.
I am inviting all faith groups, all politicians to be a united heart against the tyranny. Muslim countries should review their ties with Israel.
Today, Turkey expelled Israel's ambassador. Israel responded in kind, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released a statement responding to criticism from Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. A man whose hands are drenched in the blood of countless Kurdish civilians in Turkey and Syria is the last one who can preach to us about military ethics. In London, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson criticized both Israel and the militant group Hamas that runs Gaza.
I'm deeply saddened by the loss of life in Gaza, where peaceful protests are being exploited by extremists. I urge Israel to show restraint in the use of live fire.
But the U.S. stood firm. Only Hamas was to blame for the Gaza violence, said U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley.
For some people, the embassy opening is said to be a reason to engage in violence. How is that justified?
Instead of blaming the U.S. Embassy opening, the world should focus on Iran, said Israeli Ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon.
Iran is supporting the riots in Gaza. We regret every casualty. When we saw the pictures, we regret that. But they are being used by the Hamas.
But Palestinian Ambassador Riyad Mansour said Palestinians are expressing genuine frustration, and he asked for the world's help.
How many more Palestinians have to die before you take action?
But there is no momentum for that action, and the only communication between the two sides are during protests. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin.
In the day's other news, the Trump administration slapped new sanctions on the head of Iran's central bank today. It said the bank's chief had funneled millions of dollars to the militant group Hezbollah. It is the latest move cracking down on Iran after President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the nuclear deal last week. As the sanctions were announced, Iran's foreign minister told European officials in Brussels that Tehran must profit from the deal if it's going to remain.
We are starting a process that needs to be very intensive, and we don't have a lot of time. We need to reach some sort of guarantee that these benefits can be guaranteed for Iran.
The European Union's foreign policy chief said they had left the meeting with a blueprint to continue efforts to save the nuclear deal. North Korea has reportedly threatened to cancel next month's meeting with President Trump and suspended a summit with the South just hours before it was set to begin. North Korean state media blamed joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises, saying the drills were, quote, a provocation. A State Department spokeswoman said she was not aware of any change in plans.
We are operating under the idea and the notion that the president's meeting is going forward with Chairman Kim next month.
White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders said in a statement that the U.S. will, quote, look at what North Korea has said independently and continue to coordinate closely with our allies. Back in this country, the woman nominated by President Trump to be CIA director now appears to have enough support to be confirmed. The Senate Intelligence Committee's top Democrat, Mark Warner, and others had raised concerns over Gina Haspel's role in the CIA's harsh interrogation tactics, including torture of detainees after 9/11. Today, Warner said he will vote yes after Haspel wrote in a letter to him that the program should have never taken place. She had refused to make such a condemnation during her Senate confirmation hearing last week. Facebook shed new light on its efforts to remove fake or offensive material, the first time it has made such a report public. The social network said that it deleted over 865 million posts in the first 3 months of 2018, mostly spam. It took down 583 million fake accounts in the same period. There was room for improvement when it came to flagging hate speech. Facebook had caught only a little over a third of such posts before users did. And on Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 193 points to close at 24,706. The Nasdaq fell 59 points, and the S&P 500 dropped 18. And new journalism's pioneer Tom Wolfe died today at the age of 88. Starting in the 1960s, his vivid writing captured American culture in groundbreaking nonfiction like The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test and novels like The Bonfire of the Vanities. We'll have more on Tom Wolfe's work and influence later in the show. Still to come on the NewsHour, life inside Gaza, where harsh conditions have contributed to deadly protests. Pairing first-generation college students with mentors who've been in their shoes, and much more. As we reported earlier, it's been a day of anger and recrimination in the Middle East and beyond. In a few moments, Nick Schifrin will be back to speak with the former U.S. ambassador to Israel. But first, special correspondent Jane Ferguson reports for us again from Gaza.
Confrontations between Palestinians and Israeli security forces broke out on the West Bank today. Protests also took place on the Gaza border, although they were smaller than Monday's, when an eruption of anger in Gaza led to desperate scenes. Crowds of young protesters trying to rush towards the border fence with Israel. Hundreds shot down and carried away. For weeks, Palestinians have been protesting for the right to leave this strip of land. And in the last 2 days, tens of thousands have joined in.
The Israelis have been mostly concerned about the size of this growing crowd and trying to persuade Gazans not to show up for these mass protests. They have been dropping leaflets that say, what has Hamas ever done for you? That Hamas is failing the people here in an attempt to try to stop them being told to come to the protests.
It didn't work, with people arriving in huge numbers to the edges of the Palestinian territory, including Ahmad Obaid. He was shot in both legs by Israeli snipers at these protests weeks ago, but keeps coming back. Limping slowly and in pain, he brought his 4 young children with him.
قريب من هون أنت مش خايفة. You're not afraid. The Israelis are close by.
We are not afraid of the Israelis because this is our right. We are ready to push forward. Even with the pain of our wounds, even as people get killed, we are ready to sacrifice to free our lands and take back our rights.
To him, that means returning to their ancestral villages. The protesters want to go back to the homes their families lived in before the formation of the State of Israel. A day marked today by Palestinians as Al-Nakba, Arabic for the catastrophe. Israel says these protests are the sole work of Hamas, the armed Islamist group that runs Gaza. Hamas has encouraged the people to turn up for the protests. Shops were shuttered as a strike shut down the city streets, and loudspeakers urged people to attend. Hamas insists these are popular protests by the people.
For the last few days or weeks maybe, the Palestinian issue has been taken from the table and put under the table. And the international community now is concentrating on Iran, Syria, North Korea and others. Palestinians today were able to raise their voice and to remember the world that we are still here, we are still suffering.
Life in Gaza is a painful struggle to get by. An 11-year blockade by Israel and neighboring Egypt has cut off the Palestinian territory from much of the world and brought its economy to its knees. The siege was put in place in 2007 after Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip. To the US and Israel, the group is a terrorist organization. 2 million people are packed into this small strip of land, 1/10 the size of Rhode Island. Permission to leave is rare, and unemployment stands at 40%. For the young generation protesting, few have any prospects for a job or a future where they can afford to raise a family.
You cannot believe how is the complex and difficult life as we are now. All the streets are full of trashes or of garbage. All the people, they have no work, they have not employment.
We visited Imad from the protest in his home. He and his family have fallen on very tough times. Before the 2014 war, he drove a taxi, but his car and apartment were destroyed in the Israeli airstrikes. So they moved into this cinder block shack. It has no running water, and they cook on an open fire, unable to afford gas. He did casual work on building sites to pay the rent, but hasn't been able to work since he got shot. The family survive on handouts and the small vegetable patch in their backyard. Most Gazans cannot afford a generator during the lengthy power cuts here.
When people here run out of electricity, they only get 3 hours a day. They can either use a small battery to try to operate lights, or they just go outside and light fires.
This life has given Imad, like many Gazans, a sense of having little to lose.
Why do you go?
Although it is dangerous and they use ammunition and gas, if the Palestinian nation does not go to fight for its rights, then who will do it for us? We are walking into death, but we are not afraid. I have the right to do this. Even when the Israeli soldier shoots me, he is afraid of me. The soldier knows this is my right.
Over 2,000 people have been injured in the protests. Many, like Imad, have been shot in the leg. At a field hospital nearby, the conditions were those of a war zone. Some who had been shot were painfully young. Medical workers raced to the demonstration to collect the injured.
We're heading out with the ambulances now. They have been racing back and forth from the field hospitals to the front near the fence. And now they're going back to pick up more people who have been shot.
When we arrived close to the border fence, carried towards us on a stretcher, another protester, another gunshot wound in the leg. Back at the field hospital, some of the injured shook with convulsions, a side effect of the tear gas fired by Israeli soldiers. Others lay in pain, quietly hoping they will walk again. Gazans have vowed to continue the protests despite the deadly consequences. With the peace process in the Middle East a mere memory at this stage, these bloody images may keep coming. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jane Ferguson in Gaza.
With me now is Daniel Shapiro, who served as U.S. Ambassador to Israel under President Obama from 2011 to 2017. Ambassador Shapiro, thank you very much for being on the NewsHour. We've heard from U.S. officials today and yesterday really blaming Hamas and only Hamas for the violence inside of Gaza. But as we heard from Jane Ferguson's story right now, isn't there genuine frustration at Israeli actions inside Gaza and conditions inside Gaza as well?
Well, there's no question conditions inside Gaza are horrific, and people there are really suffering in a very genuine way. I have to say, I think the lion's share of the responsibility for this immediate crisis does fall on Hamas's shoulders. They are a terrorist organization, and they've intentionally embedded themselves within a civilian population in these instances, in which there are both violent acts aimed at the fence, things being lobbed and shot over the fence, and unarmed protesters, all in one large chaotic area. Hamas has squandered a lot of resources over the years on building rockets to attack Israel with, which Israel can now counter with missile defense systems. They've spent a lot of money on digging tunnels to attack Israel under the border. Israel now has technology to detect and destroy those tunnels. All that they really have left to try to assert their relevance and try to push back against those humanitarian conditions is to throw their own people into harm's way in this very chaotic situation where there are both violent and nonviolent events happening at the same time.
Should Israel and the international community, though, try and do its best to alleviate some of the humanitarian concerns inside of Gaza as a way to reduce that violence?
The humanitarian situation in Gaza does need to be addressed. I would say in the first instance, the United States and Egypt should work together on an initiative to get the current violence to de-escalate by getting Hamas to put some more controls and end these protests and these violent events at the fence, and get Israel to try to stand down its rules of engagement, and then to work with the international community to fund a significant humanitarian effort to bring in the humanitarian aid, the consumer goods, and the infrastructure repair to Gaza's very badly damaged water and power infrastructure, which is part of what's making people in Gaza feel like they are so desperate.
We saw this scene of dissonance yesterday, and I'll show viewers the split screen. At the same time we saw this violence in Gaza, we also saw the opening in Jerusalem. You've been in favor of the embassy opening in Jerusalem, but doesn't the embassy opening contribute to some of the tension, contribute to some of the violence?
It was certainly jarring to watch those scenes juxtaposed against one another. I do think it's appropriate that the embassy be in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has always been Israel's capital, and the embassy is housed in West Jerusalem, which is really not controversial. Israel will always maintain control of that territory, even in a two-state solution. I think the administration made two very important mistakes, however. One was in announcing the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and the intention to move the embassy, they did not frame that decision within the broader context of our strategic objective, which is not where the embassy sits. It's a two-state solution. It's a situation where Palestinians can also achieve their aspirations for a capital in East Jerusalem. It would have to be negotiated. The precise borders are not knowable yet. But to make clear that we see all of these things happening as part of a package would certainly have made it easier for the Palestinians to absorb a decision they didn't care for. The other mistake they made was the choice of the date. May 14th, yesterday, is the secular calendar anniversary of Israel's founding, and 70 years ago, President Truman recognized Israel when its independence was declared. But it's also the day that Palestinians commemorate as the Nakba, the day they lost everything because of the establishment of Israel and their displacement from their land. Today or tomorrow is the beginning of Ramadan. So this event at the embassy yesterday could easily have been scheduled 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks from now, and separated from some of the most emotional days on the Palestinian calendar.
Ambassador, you mentioned the strategic situation. I want to zoom out quickly just a little bit more. Does the embassy opening, does the violence in Gaza, the deaths, does that challenge the alliance that's building between Israel and Saudi Arabia and the Sunni states, and does also fray the U.S.-European alliance? The Europeans, of course, came out against this embassy move.
There's a lot of things fraying the U.S.-European alliance these days. President Trump's withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, first and foremost, a number of other trade disputes. Now this sense that European views, let's say, on how to address Israeli-Palestinian matters are being not taken into account. So there are many things causing those tensions. As for the Sunni states like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, they have made clear that while they care about the Palestinians, it's not the highest issue on their priority. The highest issue on their priority is Iran and other extremist organizations, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they view Israel as a strategic partner against those enemies because Israel also faces them, and they are part of a United States-led camp that can make common cause on those common security challenges. Unfortunately, when the Palestinian issue descends into violence and chaos and despair, and doesn't look like there's any pathway to achieve that two-state solution, which is the only possible resolution to the conflict, it makes it much harder for Israel and those Arab states to make common cause, to bring their quiet security cooperation out into the open and do the kind of normalization that would really benefit everybody, Israelis, Arabs, and Palestinians.
Daniel Shapiro, former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, we continue our special series on rethinking college. Tonight, we focus on so-called first-generation college goers. This year, 45% of freshmen at the University of California system are the first in their family to seek a four-year degree. Hari Srinivasan visited UCLA to see how campuses are responding to the challenge. It's part of our weekly series, Making the Grade.
I am a first-generation scholar. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago.
Professor Lori Frazier-Yokely says her path to becoming the first tenured woman of color at UCLA's political science department has shaped who she is.
I'm a product of my mom, a high school education, and my dad, an 8th grade education.
And that's important to these students, who are themselves the first in their families to go to college.
So I want an opportunity to get
Frazier-Yokely is taking part in a new initiative from California's UC system that uses first-generation faculty to guide first-generation students.
So I'm teaching this class today because I want you guys to be okay with being the first. I want to be able to validate your concerns and your fears and your frustrations with being first generation because I've been there.
Last fall, university administrators asked 900 first-generation faculty and staff, like Frazier-Yokely, to become mentors. The goal is to decrease dropout rates. Nationally, only 40% of first-generation college students make it to graduation.
We want our first-generation students to thrive. We want them to feel like they belong here and that they're going to be here for 4 years through graduation.
University of California President Janet Napolitano.
Admissions are one thing, enrollment is one thing, but graduation is the thing.
But to succeed in a demanding academic environment like UCLA, the first-gen students have to overcome something called the imposter syndrome.
One of the definitions of imposter syndrome is students who worked really hard to get into campus, but they still are carrying with them like a sense that they don't truly belong, that at any moment someone's going to come and tap them on their shoulder and say, you know what, we made a mistake, right? For first generation scholars who are carrying with them imposter syndrome, you are not allowing yourself to thrive. Something as fundamental as saying, hey, I deserve to go to office hours every week if I want to. I deserve to have someone sort of sit down with me during their office hours and I can ask questions, right? One-on-one. I deserve that opportunity.
UCLA senior Violet Salazar knows what imposter syndrome feels like. Salazar helped create an entire dorm floor dedicated to incoming first-generation students after her own freshman experience proved difficult.
It was kind of hard to get to know people when you always felt like you were, I guess, lesser than them.
Because you're the first.
Because I am first gen or because I am Latina. And also just coming from a very low socioeconomic background.
These are some On the day we visited, the first-generation dorm hosted a meeting led by student Clara Wynn, a first-gen student herself who also works with UCLA's mental health resources.
How do you practice resilience as a first-generation student?
It's really easy to get caught up in your failures, I feel like, in college, because it's really important to be resilient, to keep in mind that it's okay and you can recover.
So thoughts are the way that you think about things, like, oh man, I think I'm gonna do bad on this test. Or if I start getting nervous, like my heart starts beating really fast or I start sweating, that's kind of a physical symptom. And then that might affect how I behave. What's an example of how your thoughts, behaviors, and physical symptoms kind of come together?
You first think oh my God, I didn't study enough, I'm a fail, blah, blah, blah. And then it's I start sweating a lot and my palms are sweating that I can't even hold still the pencil. And then I actually start forgetting things and I'm like, I studied this, like what's going on? And then like I forget things and then I actually fail.
One of the techniques that we use to combat that cycle is called mindfulness. But being mindful is basically toning into those thoughts that you have and trying to control that environment around you. I wanted her to notice physical symptoms like the hands sweating, to kind of manage your thoughts better and say, hey, you know, I'm not unprepared for this test. I have the skills to do it. Then maybe she can try to tell her body to calm down. And then those things will start coming back in her brain.
Many first-generation students are also balancing the guilt of not contributing to their family's income when they're away at school.
You know, you might have a financial struggle, so you should go to work. Or you have siblings, so you need to take care of them before you get to do school. I think those things are hard to let go of when you get here.
And for some, there's the added stress of immigration status. Freshman Jacqueline Tafoya, who is a U.S. citizen, worries that in the current political climate, friends from her home community could be suddenly deported.
And there are millions of families that are struggling, whether it's, you know, having that scary moment where you never know if your family member is going to get deported, or you never know. There can be a moment in your life where one day you're happy with your family sitting at dinner, and the next day your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, you find out you're getting deported. You know, there's like that moment where you know that can happen. So it's very scary. Sorry.
University administrators hope their new focus on mentoring first-generation students will help both students and their families succeed.
We know that our first-gen students, within just a few years of graduating, are making more than their entire families. We also know that they're tremendous contributors to the state of California, to the economy of California. And it's what higher education is there for, particularly public higher education, is to open those doors of opportunity and to really give meaning to the cliche phrase, the American dream.
In Los Angeles, I'm Hari Srinivasan for the PBS NewsHour.
Being the first in the family to attend college presents one kind of pressure on students, but increasingly a wide variety of students are presenting symptoms of depression and anxiety, and worse, hopelessness. Last night, we looked at this concerning situation in the first of a two-part series around National Mental Health Month. Tonight, Jeffrey Brown returns to a school trying to address the problem. He talks to three young people at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology about their participation in the Portraits of Resilience project.
I'm Emily Tang. I'm finishing my junior year now. I'm studying electrical engineering and computer science with a minor in linguistics.
My name is Victor Morales, and I graduated in 2014. I studied mathematics. I'm looking for a job now as a teacher.
My name is Haley Cope. I'm a senior here at MIT in Women and Gender Studies.
They are three high-achieving students at one of the world's most prestigious universities. They've also suffered crippling depression and been through years of therapy and medication. For Haley, who grew up in rural Pennsylvania, the problem started well before college.
I thought it was kind of a normal thing. Oh, doesn't every middle schooler try to harm themselves? No, they don't. And so definitely middle school, high school is a very turbulent time, both in my family life and with the stress of applying to colleges, trying to make myself perfect for that, for coming into MIT, my dream school.
Make yourself perfect.
Yes, sir.
That's a big thing.
It is.
Yeah.
It's not something I can do alone. It's not something achievable. By the time I got to MIT, I failed every single class my freshman fall and had a problem with alcohol. By my freshman spring was when I realized, after a classmate of mine in my dormitory committed suicide, I realized I should really be getting help again.
Haley sought counseling on campus, and later, when she herself became suicidal, she spent time at McLean Hospital, a psychiatric facility outside Boston. Emily, too, points to early pressures growing up in Plano, Texas, including expectations within her family and stressful relationships with peers.
I got through it, I kept going. And then once I got to college, I felt so tired, so out of it all the time. The depression really hit me hard again, and this time it was sort of worse than ever. It was really easy for me to just sort of slip through the cracks, for me to just sort of stop going to class, stop functioning, stop living my daily life, and that was when I went on leave from school.
Victor says he always felt like an outsider as an immigrant from Mexico who was raised in Merced, California, and as someone who came to see himself as bisexual. By his sophomore year at MIT, he experienced debilitating anxiety, but says he didn't understand it was a form of mental illness.
So I just blamed myself, and I slept
What did you
through-
think was going on?
I thought everybody gets stressed out and everybody freezes when they're stressed out. But I slept through an exam, and I didn't even feel like even emailing the professor because I felt so much shame, just had so much anxiety built up. I had this feeling like I didn't belong at MIT.
You mean as in you're an imposter here?
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to be here. And it wasn't until months after I graduated, I was starting to go through the symptoms of mental illnesses and depression, and I realized I think I have depression.
Did opening up to your family help or hurt, or what was that experience like?
At first, it was hurtful. I come from this kind of stereotypical Mexican family, and depression in our community is like an evil spirit.
Emily, what happened when you told your family or people back home?
I come from an Asian American household, obviously, and in China, there's not. Mental health care is not a thing, it's sort of like you don't talk about it, you just get through it, it doesn't exist, right? It was really a struggle, I think, to really get my parents to understand what I was going through.
But what about coming here, the pressure cooker of coming to a place where everybody's a high achiever?
Oh, absolutely. Not to discount the, perhaps utilitarian framework of MIT that kind of puts people's value based on how many hours you can spend in lab or how well you do on your classes.
You feel it?
You do.
And you did get to a point at times where you thought of taking your life?
Yes, sir. It got the worst at the end of my freshman spring semester, and I was hospitalized.
Did either of you ever get to that point? Yes?
Yeah. I didn't want to live life without the flavor.
For Emily, things came to a head at home during her leave from MIT.
I applied 3 times to return before I finally got accepted to return, and they were sort of like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you emailing this person? Why aren't you trying harder? I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I walked out of the house. It was like a body of water like in the neighborhood, and I kind of walked to the edge of it, and I was just kind of sitting there, and I was thinking about killing myself. I saw my parents' car driving by. They were driving around the neighborhood looking for me, and after a couple hours, a friend talked me down. The next day we talked about it, and my dad kind of hit the point, and he was like, I really think Emily does care about this. It is her future after all. And I think that was kind of the turning point.
That goes to a larger theme in the Portraits of Resilience project. In addition to therapy and medication, these students found critical support from friends and loved ones.
I actually got really lucky in that respect. I was in a living group. It's really small, really tight-knit, and 2 upperclassmen had been through really similar experiences. And so I sort of had their experiences to guide me. I had friends to walk me to my appointments.
Through my depression, I built up kind of like a collection of techniques. Like, how do I overcome anxiety? Like, what do I do if I feel anxiety? Sometimes I would call a friend to get me out of bed. Anyone, even people who are not at a campus, parents especially, can do something about this just by talking about it.
All 3 are now eager to share what they've learned about themselves in the hope of helping others.
I don't determine my beauty, my smartness, my success based on other people anymore. And that was one of those things that I deconstructed. And after that, it felt so natural to tell my story. These weaknesses that I used to think were weaknesses are now strengths of mine.
In my community, I had these kind of conversations with people that went something along the lines of, if you're going to mental health and counseling, make sure that you don't say anything about suicide, because they're going to commit you and then you're going to be forced to leave MIT and then you're never going to come back. And so I really wanted to address that kind of stigma. It's like saying, don't go to the doctor after your heart attack. MIT is going to kick you out.
I started an antidepressant that I think is working finally. It's a process, but I think I get a little better at learning how to navigate my resources and how to get through the crisis with minimal damage and minimal impact on my life.
Victor, what are your plans for the future?
There's so much I want to do. I want to go back to grad school. I care a lot about people from Latin America, but I also want to learn more in math. So I'm kind of like, which direction do I go? We'll see, what ends up falling into place.
I'm the president of my dorm, and I have been for the last year. I will openly talk about what I'm going through. I will tell people about the resources available, and I will offer myself.
Haley has a coding job when she graduates, and there's a happy new twist to her story. In her essay for Portraits of Resilience, she wrote of a new friend.
In the story, I talk about meeting a friend in the psychiatric hospital. That friend became my best friend, who became my boyfriend, who became my fiance, and in October will be my husband. Making that journey together has been a great and difficult and process full of grace and growth.
Emily Tang, Victor Morales, Haley Cope, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
A follow-up now from a leading expert on depression and anxiety in young people. Alfie Breland-Noble is Associate Professor of Psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical Center. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
We've been watching an attempt to put a public face on this problem. So I want to first ask you, how much does the stigma remain, and how much are young people more willing to come forward and talk about it?
So I think there's always going to be a stigma associated with mental illness. It's just a part of what it means for people who struggle with these illnesses. I think what I've noticed in recent years, 5 to 10 years, is that millennials and the young people coming right behind them are far more likely and willing to talk about these issues. I wouldn't say that it has completely eradicated the stigma, but absolutely young people who are in college and right behind them, high schoolers, are far more likely to share that these are things they're struggling with.
How much do experts like yourself understand why this seeming rise in anxiety and depression and suicide? Why is that happening?
One factor is that when you look at the young people we saw, you see racial diversity, which I think is amazing and wonderful, because these illnesses are so much more stigmatized in communities of color. I do think that people are more aware of what some of these issues are. They're aware of signs and symptoms. And what we find is that for African Americans and other communities of color, people feel that they're exponentially stigmatized in addition to race, gender, sexual orientation, or sexuality by having a label or being diagnosed with a mental illness. And so we heard one young man say, the Latino brother, when he talked about seeing these things and thinking it was normal, at some point during his college career, someone enlightened him and shared with him, these are signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, which a light bulb was able to go off for him.
And in terms of factors behind it, do we know more about is it the genetics or the social behavior? We heard some of the references to social media playing a new role.
Absolutely. So there's always going to be the hereditary factors and the chemical and biological factors. I think what's changed for some of our young people is social media. They are so much more inundated with all kinds of information, not all of it positive. The young people spoke about what it means to be constantly comparing yourself.
Right.
So you're always looking at report cards, so to speak, in different aspects of life. And I think it can absolutely have a negative impact on our young people.
How prepared or unprepared are schools today?
So I think what I will say is for colleges and universities, they're trying, right? So they don't always have the bandwidth and the capacity to accommodate the sheer volume of students who are coming forward, much more so now than even 20 years ago when I was in school. I think that what colleges and universities are trying to do is find extenders, find other ways to provide support for young people so that everything is not funneling just through the counseling center. And there are many opportunities that I think colleges and universities have found to do that, whether that's connecting with community members who can also provide care, connecting with different kinds of apps or other electronic types of things to help our young people develop coping skills. So it's not necessarily full care per se, but it is providing a stopgap measure so that in between visits or until a young person can get a visit with a person in the counseling center, they have other ways that they can support themselves.
So what kind of treatment is available to young people now?
So what I always tell young people when I treat them is that there's the fast way, the slow way, and the best way. And I think when we think about fast and slow ways, medications, psychotropic medications, psychiatric medications are absolutely an option for people. I think along with that, it's important to think about the kinds of talk therapy that are available to people. And I always say that the best way is to try to do a combination of both, to the extent that a young person and a family feel comfortable with psychiatric medication. So for talk therapy, we're thinking about things like cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, teaching coping skills, and support groups. And then we know what some of the different kinds of anti-anxiety and antidepressants are that are available to young people.
So finally, what's the most important thing you want young people to know who perhaps are starting to experience anxiety and depression, and their parents? What should they know?
I think for parents and young people, they should absolutely know that they are not alone, that mental illness does not discriminate. It can impact anyone, and that there are people right around us, our loved ones, family members, community members, church members, other peers at school who are struggling with these issues. And so it's really important for them to know they're not alone, there's help. And I tell young people all the time, 2 things: take diets and breaks from social media.
Take diets from social media.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Diets and take a break from social media, and reach out for help to people you feel like you can trust.
All right. Alfie Breland Noble of Georgetown University. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, remembering the American writer Tom Wolfe, who died today. Wolfe first broke through to a wider audience in the early 60s as one of the seminal voices behind so-called new journalism, a form of nonfiction writing that used fictional literary styles and was distinctly different in technique. His magazine pieces led to nonfiction books that put American subcultures under the microscope, often with a wry and biting tone. The electric Kool-Aid acid test zeroed in on the counterculture. The Painted Word targeted the world of art. And one of his best-regarded books, The Right Stuff, which was later made into a movie, showcased the heroism of the first American astronauts. Wolfe later turned to writing novels. His biggest hit, The Bonfire of the Vanities, was a lacerating satire of money, power, and New York life in the 80s. He spoke with the NewsHour's Elizabeth Farnsworth in 1998 about why he wanted to bring a reporter's eye to his fiction.
Reporting is absolutely essential to the novel, now more than it ever was.
Why?
It's because the novel is not going to be able to compete with television, with movies, with other forms of stories, unless it exploits to the full what only print can do, and what only in this case only the novel can do, and that is to bring people inside of these amazing worlds that exist in the United States today.
Some thoughts about Tom Wolfe and his work from a writer he influenced. Susan Orlean is a journalist, author, and staff writer for The New Yorker. She's the author of 8 books, including the bestseller, The Orchid Thief. Susan Orlean, it's a pleasure to have you with us. What was it about Tom Wolfe? What was it about him that influenced you?
I read the electric acid Kool-Aid test when I was in high school, and as much as I was a big reader at the time, this was transformational. There was a voice, a confidence, a tone that I had never encountered before, particularly in nonfiction. I carried that book around with me for years, and I really do think it's what made me want to be a nonfiction writer. There was just a spirit in his writing that I had never encountered before. It was like hearing jazz for the first time.
Well, it's interesting. He just said in that interview with Elizabeth Farnsworth, he mentioned American life. He was uniquely American, wasn't he?
Yes, and he took the amazing mosaic of American subcultures as his subject. Everything from the merry pranksters traveling on their bus, taking LSD every 5 minutes, to the Upper East Side, very affluent and indulged denizens of that neighborhood. And he looked at them all in a somewhat equal way. These were tribes that he wanted to analyze and understand.
Of course, there was so much praise for his work. At times, his critics said he went too far. He was not sensitive enough to race, to other things. Did he go too far sometimes?
He was pretty unburdened by the propriety of what he said. I think his feeling was that everything was fair game. He could be easily misinterpreted, which is an issue for a writer. You do have some responsibility for the way your words could be perceived. And I think he felt that his responsibility ended at the page. And if people read it wrong, it was really their problem.
Where do you think that all came from? He was Southern, he was born and raised in Virginia. Any sense of what made him the writer he was?
He was a serious student of literature, and I think it's really important to realize that he had these two very basic but serious underpinnings to his work, namely a really serious understanding of literature and a deep regard for and talent for reporting. His books only succeeded because the reporting was so good. He seemed to take a sort of anthropologist's delight in analyzing subcultures, figuring out how power flowed within them, how people made their way out of them, and what impact it had for these little groups to bump up against people who were not inside the tribe. I think he really was at heart an anthropologist.
It sounds like, Susan Orlean, you're saying his nonfiction more important than his fiction?
No, not necessarily. I think his fiction, when he hit it right, was brilliant. And I don't think the world is the same after The Bonfire of the Vanities, quite honestly. For him, I think fiction was merely an extension of the nonfiction, where he took the kind of reporting that his nonfiction had and simply created an ideal narrative in which to tell that reporting. And he said often that his novels were very dependent on fact and on observation and on the real world, and that's what they were meant to do, to explain the real world to us through a fictional narrative. I think that his nonfiction and his fiction were very closely related. Just one had a narrative drawn from real life, and the other had a narrative that he created.
Last thing, he was also personally distinctive. He dressed in white all the time. I read that he always wore the vest, the white shoes. What was that all about?
Well, I think he liked, as he once said, he didn't think he could blend in, so he decided he might as well really stand out. He was a real dandy. I think he had a Southern gentleman's enjoyment of being fully turned out every day, and perfect contrast to an era in which, starting in the 60s, the idea of dressing, for reporters to dress well, was unheard of. I mean, people came to work in T-shirts and Birkenstocks, and there was Tom Wolfe. I think he enjoyed playing on our expectations of convention. And just as we expected the ink-stained wretch in the newsroom to look a certain way, he looked exactly the opposite. Refined, elegant, and completely out of no particular era. He was a sort of timeless figure with his getup.
Remembering Tom Wolfe, writer and author Susan Orlean, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Later this month, Starbucks will close its more than 8,000 coffee shops for an afternoon of anti-bias training. The aim is to raise their sensitivity of the employees around race and ethnicity after last month's episode at a Philadelphia shop where the police were called about two black men simply sitting and waiting. Talks on the subject are always sensitive, and tonight, writer Ijoma Oluo shares her humble opinion on why that talk can be so fraught, even with one's own mother.
Here's the thing about my mom. My mom, who is white, is the kindest, most generous person I've ever known. But she's also exhausting. She's a bundle of whimsy and emotion, and she doesn't always think before she speaks. So when she left me a voicemail saying that she had had an epiphany about race and I should call her back right away, I really did not want to do that. Don't get me wrong, I talk about race every day as an activist and educator. And while I had noticed that my work on race had started to build some awkward distance between my mom and me, I still didn't want to talk about race with her. I mean, she's my mom. It's personal and awkward, like talking to your mom about sex. Turns out, I didn't need to worry about whether to call her back because, like many moms, she immediately called me back and kept calling until I answered the phone. The conversation was as bad as I'd feared, maybe worse. She'd made a joke at work that had to do with race. Not a racist joke, but one that was more a joke for the black community. And a black colleague had challenged her. What do you know about being black? Well, my mom was pretty indignant at first. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know I raised 3 black kids. I was cringing as she said this to me. Had she not read my work? And then came her epiphany. She realized that her coworker must face so much racism as a black man that he couldn't tell who the good white people were. And that if she were in his shoes, she'd probably be angry all the time too. That was the full epiphany. She had decided that the next day she was going to march over to her coworker and explain that she had raised 3 black kids, so she got it. I literally shouted, "No!" like people do in action movies when they try to stop their friends from getting into the car that is rigged with explosives. Then I took a deep breath. I tried to explain that being a white woman who loves black people, who has even given birth to black people, is still very different from living as a black person and experiencing firsthand the full force of a white society every day of your life. She asked if she at least got credit for doing black hair for all those years. I said no. It was a long conversation, and oh, was it painful. But it opened up a new way of seeing each other. So, as awful as it was, I'm glad the conversation happened. It is in our conversations about race and racism that we find understanding, empathy, and opportunities to make real change in our day-to-day lives. Start talking. More importantly, start listening. It is not always pleasant to talk about race. In fact, it almost never is, but it is worth it.
Ijoma Oluo. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again right here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
You're watching PBS.